Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. Loads and loads of love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well and that you are going to settle down and get yourself a lovely hot cup of cocoa or tea or coffee, whatever it is you drink, or if you need something cold and refreshing like a lemonade, go and get it because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my story that I'm going to share with you happened in Washington State in the early 90s when I was about 30 years old at the time and unmarried with a very loving, devoted cat called Basil, who was my beloved, very special companion. What I've always loved about cats is they're so independent, and they're independent enough to be left for hours at a time without needing any supervision, which of course was very convenient for me as I was out working during the day. I was living in Stevens County at the time, which is located on the Canada-US border, and I was renting an apartment in the neighbourhood close to the city of Colville, where I was working at a local florist shop, assisting my best friend, the shop owner Katrina, into creating the most fabulous floral displays for people for every single occasion, like red roses for Valentine's Day, poinsettias, holly and Christmas roses for Christmas time, orange blossoms, lily, roses, jasmine and gardenias for weddings, and roses, gladioles, carnations and snowdrops for birthdays. Last but not least, lilies, orchids, chrysanthemums, roses and carnations for funerals. Business was booming for us, and we relied heavily on a local driver called Bobby to deliver the flowers to our customers in our delivery van. But one afternoon he failed to show up from a drop-off, and there was still an outstanding delivery to do. So I told Katrina that I would drop off the flowers for her as it wasn't too far out of my way. I did not know at the time that this one delivery would ultimately change my life forever. "Oh, will you?" said Katrina, giving me a kiss on the cheek. "That would be a huge help," she said. "I wonder where on earth Bobby has got to. It's not like him to be so late. I do hope everything's all right with him." I gathered the attractive arrangement of carnations, roses, ribbons and lilies, along with the deepest sympathy card attached, and packed it carefully into the back of my trunk. It was the least I could do for Katrina, as over the years she had become a faithful, devoted friend to me, and had helped me during a very challenging, tumultuous time in my life. I had been living with an abusive, aggressive boyfriend at the time, whom I had courageously chosen to leave, but I was left really stranded and high and dry with no money or job. I remember just breaking down into tears on the street corner as I had hit rock bottom in my life, and I had nowhere to turn for help, and the helpless despair I felt was pernicious. On noticing my obvious distress from the florist's window across the street, Katrina had whisked me into the florist shop like a fairy godmother and made me a big hot cup of tea with lots and lots of sugar to calm me down. Then, like a bird with a broken wing, she had taken me under her diligent charge, and I had never looked back. I was now an independent, free-spirited maverick with a fabulous job, and it was all thanks to Katrina, who had put her faith in me and taught me all about arranging flowers. I had surprised myself by really showing a natural individualistic aptitude and flair for flower arranging. We were now running this thriving business together as a victorious team, and we had become like soul sisters, not to put too fine a point on it. In truth, the delivery place was really out of the way for me, but I didn't care at all, as I was eager to assist Katrina in every way. I discovered that my bright red Dodge Stealth was not really equipped to tackle the rocky, precipitous, uneven road that led to the property for my drop-off, but I really wasn't bothered. I was going to deliver these flowers, come hell or high water. I realised that the drop-off was well off the beaten track in a secluded wilderness area, surrounded by exquisite verdant rolling valleys, pretty flowery meadows, quaint little barns and ubiquitous trees, not to mention silvery lakes. While indeed it was spectacularly beautiful, it really was rather remote and isolated. Still, it wasn't too late. I glanced briefly at my watch. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and I still had an hour before it got dark, as it was early spring. I drove down the long, windy gravel driveway, fringed on either side by magnificent towering oak trees. I parked my car outside the door of a very arresting colonial home and made my way to the immaculate dark blue front door, with its gold horseshoe knocker, which I wrapped a couple of times. I was carrying the large bouquet of flowers in my hand. As I waited for the door to be answered, I could hear feet coming to the door, and then the next thing I knew was that the front door was being flung open, and a young woman bustled me into the kitchen and was busying herself with a kettle and insisting that I sat down. I could see that she was very flustered, and I was eager to be of help. "Are you all right?" I asked, looking at her with deep concern. "Forgive me for saying so, but you do look rather frantic, troubled and overwrought." "I'm so glad you came," said the woman. "My name is Candace, by the way. I really could do with a friend right now. My life has been a roller coaster ride since my son went missing, and I feel completely overwhelmed by everything. It's like I can't see the wood for the trees, nor can I even think straight." "Your son is missing?" I asked, looking at her in horror. "How dreadful! What do you think happened to him?" "That's what I'd like to know," said Candace, fumbling away at the kettle awkwardly. "Would you like coffee or tea?" she asked. "Whatever you're having will be fine," I said, looking at the woman with great empathy. It was terrible to lose a child. I couldn't imagine a worse fate. I studied Candace with a keen interest. I could see that she was an emotional wreck, but then who wouldn't be? I could tell she hadn't been sleeping, as under her eyes revealed dark telltale bags, and her pretty blonde hair was tousled around her face as if it hadn't seen a hairbrush for weeks. Candace was shaking as she placed down my cup and saucer and handed me a couple of chocolate biscuits. "Sit down," I insisted. "I want you to tell me your whole story. Take it from me, it really helps to talk things through. I've hit rock bottom myself before, and it's not a pretty place to be, and I'll do anything to help you." "You're right," she said, sitting down on the opposite side of the counter and clasping her hands around her head, with a look of grievous despair upon her face. "Where do I begin?" she said. "It was about 3 months ago, when my 11-year-old son, Logan, told me he was going into the woods to play with Piper, who I believed in the very early days was a fictitious friend of his that he'd made up, due to him being very lonely, although I have since learnt that 11-year-old boys are not predisposed to making up imaginary friends. They usually do that sort of thing when they're much younger. After a while I'd see him playing with Piper, and then I realised his friend was indeed real and not fictitious at all. And despite the unusual nature of their friendship, I was agreeable to it. I could see that Logan was becoming so much happier now that he had a friend. Piper is out there on the patio looking very distressed, poor thing. I think he has no idea what's happened to Logan, and you can see he's so broken up about it." "Did Piper see anything?" I asked. When your son vanished, that is." "I wish I could ask him, but the trouble is I don't think he speaks a word of English, and the moment I open the patio door, he flees away like a frightened feral cat." "Where is he?" I asked. "Maybe I can talk to him. I'm quite good with young children." "Be my guest," said Candace, leading me to the glass patio door, where, sitting perched on the step with long arms around knees and back straight up, I could see what I can only describe as a small boy, but this was no ordinary boy, as he was covered in long, flowing hazelnut hair, and his head was shaped like a dome that folded seamlessly into his shoulders. "What is that?" I asked, looking at Candace in surprise. "It looks like a boy covered in hair." "Well, he is. I call him a wild boy," said the woman. "My son's told me so many incredulous, wonderful stories about his friendship with Piper and his family. He's a very solid friend of Logan's. They don't make friendships like this anymore. This boy is so loyal to my son. My son's an only child, you see. His father died shortly after he was born, so it's been him and me against a rather hostile, belligerent, aggressive and antagonistic world, I'm afraid to say. I did realise that Piper coming into his life was indeed a miraculous blessing for the both of us. There are others of his kind living in the woods, of course, but they're very elusive and reticent, always keeping a rather safe distance. I only ever saw the mother once. She was quite scary looking, really, big and powerful, but from what Logan told me, Piper's mother has a heart on her of absolute gold and a serene, gentle, very loving nature. It's ironic, really, given how frightening she appears. It would seem that impressions can be rather misleading. Well, I do believe some of the biggest monsters are of the human kind, and they come in small, attractive packaging, like my ex-boyfriend. He was a monster of note, but that's a whole nother story, I told Candace. I studied Piper for a while. The wild boy, sensing he was being watched, looked exceedingly awkward and uncomfortable, as he didn't appreciate being scrutinized by my inquisitive eyes. He stood up, glanced in our direction, looking directly at us with his deep-set, dark, sad eyes, and I was visibly astounded by how human his face appeared. The wild boy hurriedly turned around and trotted speedily into the woods, moving faster than a horse in his eagerness to escape us, and vanishing from our sight very, very swiftly. The only way I can describe him to you is that he had the face of a boy, and was about 3 foot tall, with ape-like influences to his appearance that were most notable in his overlong arms and his short legs. Are you sure this wild boy hasn't got something to do with Logan's disappearance? It's a question that has to be asked. No, definitely not, said Candace. On the contrary, I think Piper has been watching over my son very protectively, like an older brother, and getting him out of all sorts of scrapes. According to Logan, he's been friends with this wild boy for over a year. If anything untoward were to have happened, it would have already done so. And besides, Piper's family are incredibly protective over Logan. They treat him as one of their own. Do you know, after he disappeared, his mother left me a huge amethyst stone on my doorstep as a sign of her support. Let me show it to you. It's really stunning. Wow, I said, studying the stone. This is seriously magnificent. You'd pay an absolute fortune for something like this in one of those mystic stores. Well, it's very precious to me, said Candace, touching the stone lovingly. In a strange way, it helps me to feel connected to my son, as odd as it sounds. I've been watching poor Piper there, through that window pane, for several long days now. I don't know why he comes so close to my house, but it might be his way to feel connected to Logan. Ever since Logan vanished, he's been kicking around leaves and just sitting there on the step, staring into space. He seems so lost and sad without Logan, almost as if he's grieving. I know he's missing his friend desperately. Maybe he comes close to the house to show you that you're not alone in your grief, and that he feels your pain too, I said. Well, I hadn't thought of it like that, said Candace. Now let me tell you my story, she said, chaperoning me back to the kitchen. I want to see if you can make any sense of what I'm going to tell you, because believe me, I can't. As you can imagine, I'm never too comfortable with Logan playing out there in the woods by himself, but as a mother you cannot smother your child, nor can you rob them of going exploring or having fun. Boys will be boys, and that's the way it has to be. You can't mollycoddle them or wrap them up in cotton wool, as they will never thank you for that. Anyway, one day Logan returned home from playing in the woods with Piper. He informed me that he had encountered a very strange, rather peculiar woman there. She was sitting on a rock overlooking the stream and staring into the silvery surface. I gather she was singing an intriguing, rather pretty song, and my son, who is reticent and very reserved by nature, said he felt unusually drawn to the beguiling woman, almost as if she had surreptitiously thrown out an invisible fishing line with an alluring bait at the very end, and was winding my son in. He said he walked over to where she was sitting. It would seem Piper was literally frantic and frenzied and was trying to stop Logan from approaching the woman. He sensed something was up. But Logan refused to take any notice of Piper. My son said that the woman was very pretty, with long flowing brown hair, fair skin and hazel eyes. I gather she was wearing very bohemian clothes, like a long flowery dress, with a waistcoat and a straw hat. This bewitching woman stopped singing immediately when Logan approached her, and began to chat to him in a very smooth, buttery voice. My son said he sensed there was something outer-worldly about her. He discerned when he was talking to her a rather artificial-looking fiery purple spark in her eyes that sent horrifying chills down his spine and made his blood turn icy cold. In that moment he couldn't walk away. It was like that this woman had some kind of invisible hold on him, almost as if she'd locked him in a hypnotic trance of some kind. He described the feeling as being like an animal caught up in a trap and unable to escape. And the more you tried to flee, the tighter the noose around the neck became. He said it felt exactly like that. Good grief, I said. The woman obviously had some kind of invisible power. How did he get away from her, I asked. Would you believe it? His faithful wild friend Piper came to his immediate rescue and began hurling large stones at the woman, and she began screaming all kinds of obscenities that were so vile they can't be repeated. I gather she ran away because of the stones, but she was far from happy because things hadn't turned out as she'd expected. You think this insidious woman has something to do with your son's disappearance, don't you? I asked. Oh, I'm in no doubt about that, said Candace. Who or what that woman was, I can't even begin to imagine, and I sometimes wonder if she was human at all. Tell me, she said, how do you go telling the police any of this nonsensical, outlandish stuff, which sounds so far-fetched, it's difficult to even get your own head around? When the police were asking me about the woman, and I mentioned the artificial purple spark in her eyes that my son had seen, both officers looked at each other, rolled their eyes at the back of their heads. You could see what they were thinking. Here we go again. Another complete crackpot who's completely lost her marbles. We can't believe a single word she says. As you can imagine, I clammed up after that, like an oyster in a shell, and I refused to tell them much. I didn't even tell them about the wild boy, as they already thought I belonged in the loony bin, and I didn't want to give them any more ammunition to use against me. I can understand exactly what you feel like, I said. I think in your shoes I'd have done much the same. Tell me, did your son see this frightful woman again? He most certainly saw her in the woods. He tried to avoid her, but once again he felt pulled towards her, and before he knew it he was standing at the edge of the stream talking to this woman again. He said he doesn't even know how that happened. He told me he did not even remember walking over to her. He was hoping that Piper would rescue him by throwing stones at the woman, but that never happened. Instead, he went to get his mother for help. The next thing he knew was that he saw 3 men coming towards him. They were obviously assisting the woman. They grabbed him by the arms and threw him into the back of an RV, locking the door behind him. And Logan began kicking the door and screaming at the top of his lungs, "Let me out! Let me out!" He began shouting and thumping and hitting, but they just ignored him. I gasped, "That is so terrible." My son said that suddenly you could hear the most horrifying scream, which caused his kidnappers to scatter. It was clear they were terrified by the commotion. Logan was not scared as he knew it was Piper's mother, and she had a pair of lungs on her that could make the ground quake under its intense vibration. I mean, she's a colossal creature, majestic and very big. She must weigh at the very least 700 pounds, or possibly even more, and she's easily over 8 foot tall. Anyway, when she runs, Logan says that she sounds exactly like a rhino in the thicket on a full charge. Logan, on seeing the large silhouette of Piper's mother, waved frantically from the RV window to get her attention, and that critter broke down the RV door with little difficulty, pulling Logan out of the van, throwing him over her shoulders like a sack of potatoes, and running with him swiftly all the way home, returning him safely to me. "Let me get this right," I said. "You're saying that the wild boy's mother rescued Logan from a locked RV by breaking down the door? She must be incredibly strong to be able to do that. Those doors are remarkably tough." "Well, that's what I'm saying. She is incredibly strong." "From what you're telling me, it sounds like this human woman is up to no good. It's clear she wanted to kidnap Logan, but why?" "That's what I want to know," said Logan's mother. "Why? That is the very big question. I mean, my son is not from a very wealthy family, so kidnapping for ransom has to be out of the question. I'd also like to know who those 3 men were that threw Logan into the van. Another thing Logan did tell me, what that really got my attention, was that all 3 men had the same artificial purple glint in their eyes, much like the woman had. Now that's not normal, nor is that human. I remember he told me that you could feel that they were menacing and evil. So something very nefarious has to be going on there. But what, I can't imagine. Well, what I want to know, Candace, is why these people, if they're people at all, and if you ask me, I don't think anyone who treats a child like that is human, you have to ask yourself why they're so interested in your son, as after all the first 2 times they tried to snatch him, they weren't successful at all. You would think that they would have given up by now, especially after being scared off by Piper's mother. I mean, that must have been one hell of a hair-raising event, if ever I saw one. Yet it seems that they haven't been put off at all by any of the setbacks that they've incurred. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Doesn't it make you ask yourself why? Why are they trying again? And why were they successful? Is there something about your son that makes him extra special, do you think? Well, there is, as a matter of fact. But I don't know why that should make any difference. My son's deceased father was Mongolian, and he has that rare AB blood group that affects only 1% of the population. Wow, I said, that is quite a big deal. I mean, 1% of the population is exceedingly rare. It does make me wonder if these people were after your son's blood type. It is a distinct possibility. You cannot rule it out as a motive for sure. Oh, I hope not, said Candace. I dread to think what they could have done to him. Imagine if they've killed him. Look, Candace, I said, I so wish I had the answers for you, but I really don't. And I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that everything is rosy in the garden, because it's clearly not. If you want my personal, honest opinion, I think those people, whoever they are, finally managed to kidnap your son. And whoever they were, there's something not right about them. Something not human. We've established that. I also wonder if they've done this before to other children, I mean. There could be all kinds of possibilities, from aliens to Satanists to anything. There could be any motive for why they've taken your son. I do remember Logan mentioning to me that on the kitchen area of the RV was a large bowl filled with dozens of kids' watches that could potentially have belonged to other children. That's a very distinct possibility, but you can't rule everything out. It is possible that the person could have just collected watches. I'm trying to look at every angle, with a skeptic outlook, of course. Of course, said Candace. I need your input. What's that? I asked suddenly. Can you hear it? It sounds like a strange chattering sound, almost as if two people are speaking in Cantonese. Oh, that's Piper's mother. Piper must have returned to my patio again, after we returned to the kitchen to have a bit of tea. He seems hell-bent on hanging out there to be as close to Logan as he possibly can. I imagine his mother has come to collect him. I think she doesn't like him hanging around there, feeling sorry for himself. Do you mind if I go and have a look? I said. I'd love to see what Piper's mother looks like. I'm very intrigued. Be my guest, said Candace, but try not to be seen because Piper's mother is very evasive and exceedingly shy. She's worse than Piper. I cautiously peered through the crack in the curtain and saw a massive creature talking to Piper in a very strange language that, as I said before, did sound like Cantonese. Piper's mother was so tall and statuesque and very lean, but strong and powerful at the same time, with a very large chest area, small pert breasts, and very overlong arms that made her legs almost appear short by contrast. I did discern that this mysterious creature was much more human-like than that of an ape. She was covered in long flowing hazelnut hair and possessed dark tan skin that looked leathery, a flat nose, deep-set brown eyes, and a very feminine long face. I could see by the gestures and body language that Piper looked very distressed. It was clear that the wild boy felt close to his friend Logan, being near to the house. He didn't seem to want to venture into the woods, and was putting up a bit of a stormy fight by oscillating his arms like an octopus and refusing to budge. The mother looked like she was beginning to lose her cool and get rather tough on him, and then reluctantly, with his head hanging low, he eventually followed his mother back into the woods. Poor thing, I said to Candace. I think Piper is very faithful. I'm not sure even a human child would be this devoted. I can see he's completely shredded up about your son. I don't know how I ever imagined he could be guilty of your son's disappearance. I told you, said Candace, those two were soul brothers, and you mark my words in that. Candace and I became great friends over the years. I regret to have to tell you that Logan was never found again, despite the extensive searching and all the investigations. It would seem that he disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be seen or heard from again. But those people with the purple glint in their eyes are my prime suspects, if they're people at all. Who or what are they? That's what I'd like to know. One is left with one conclusion, that our reality is a lot more mysterious than we give it credit for. Candace was so broken up by the whole ordeal that she eventually adopted a Mongolian child in order to bring some purpose back into her life, and indeed, it really did. All these years later, she still lives in that exquisite house of hers, overlooking acres of forest and beautiful rolling green countryside. I think Piper's mother and Piper have long since moved away, as Candace hasn't seen sight or sound of them for many years. We both realise now that Piper and his mother were Sasquatches or Bigfoots. In the 90s, we hadn't heard of such critters existing, but now with all the exposure, we realise what they are. Believe me, these Bigfoots were the gentlest giants you've ever seen in your life, with the most generous, compassionate hearts. Nowadays I hear the most terrible things said about Sasquatches, which really contradicts what I saw with my own eyes. So I would just like to say, don't be too hasty to allow one bad apple to contaminate the entire cartload. Katrina and I no longer run a florist in the city anymore, but we do work together as a team, as event planners, and we organise floral arrangements for all kinds of functions all over Washington. So I'm left all these years later with one question: what did happen to Logan Wallace? Wow, what an incredible story. I wonder what happened to him. And it's fascinating about those people with the purple eyes. Were they human? That's what I'd like to know. But anyway, if you like the story, please subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.